Good morning, everyone. My name is Gary Mcsweeney, and a lot of our friends are in Los Angeles this weekend for Swami's weekend down there. And last weekend he was in Palo Alto, as many of you know, but maybe not all of you. He came down, this had been 6 months in the planning. And he came down Thursday and we rehearsed the oratorio, which is the large piece of choral music he wrote about the life of Christ. And we performed it at the Spangenberg Theater at Gunn High School. We had a 92-voice choir. That was Thursday rehearsal, Friday performance. Saturday was a large talk at the Center for the Performing Arts in San Jose, 2,700-seat theater. And Swami talked about finding peace in unsettled times. And then on Sunday, we had an open house in our community where we invited everybody who wanted to come to find out more about Ananda and about spiritual community. And we had booths set up about all the different aspects of what Ananda does. And it was a glorious weekend and filled with inspiration. And I'm going to be referring to it in my talk, so I just wanted to let you know that if you weren't part of it last weekend, you shouldn't feel left out. Do we need a guru? Well, Swami answered it both Saturday night and Sunday in his talks. And he said that a young man came to him and said, "Do I need a guru?" And Swami said, "No, you don't need a guru unless you want to find God." So it's that simple. But sometimes it's helpful for us who are on the disciple end of things to study the lives of other disciples. So he mentioned in his Saturday talk about the time leading up to when he met Master, when Swami Kriyananda, who was then James Donald Walters, met Master. And I went back this week and I read the first part of his autobiography, which is called The Path. And it was all about that early life that he led leading up to that time where he met Yogananda. Swami's father was a geologist for Esso Oil Company, and he would travel the world. So Swami had an unusual childhood, to say the least. He grew up in Romania, in a small town, small village, learned the language, went to school there. At a very young age, he started to have metaphysical, spiritual experiences. He saw brilliant lights, radiant lights. He said he would lie in bed and he would feel like his consciousness was leaving his body and it was just expanding outward, and it would keep on going all the way to infinity if he allowed it. This is a young boy. And this is 1930s, so there wasn't a lot of knowledge about yoga or meditation or anything like that around, and he certainly didn't know anything about it. He grew up in a rather traditional background, an Anglican church. His mother was a strong devotee. So here's this young boy who's having these spiritual experiences, and he was also they describe him as unusual. He's very creative, he's very bright, and I think he always marches to the beat of his own drummer, and he always has. So early in his life, he got a very serious illness. He got a bout of colitis, and the doctor said it almost killed him. And part of the symptoms of having this colitis is he would have these horrible nightmares and delirium, actually. He would wake up screaming, "I don't want to be an alcoholic. I don't want to be a drunkard." This young boy, he was in some Netherlands. But what came out of that, which was interesting, is he decided, above all, he wanted to be normal. He wanted to have friends. He just wanted to be like the other kids. And he pushed away the visions that he had, the astral lights or whatever he was seeing, those brilliant lights, that feeling of spreading his consciousness to infinity. He pushed it away and he set out in his life to become normal. And it didn't come easy to him, because anyone who knows Swami, he's very individual. He loves classical music. He's never been what you would call hip or into the main culture. But as he grew up through 11, 12, 13, high school, he tried to fit in better. He dated, he hung out in cafes, he drank a little, he smoked a little. He tried to be in with the in crowd. He would listen to top 40 music, and he would learn it and go around telling people, just, "Isn't it great? This is so wonderful." But it never really truly resonated with who he was. And he started to study philosophy as much as he could at the time. But again, a lot of the yogic philosophy that we take for granted, the word guru, karma, yoga, it was unheard of in those days. So he had a hard time. He was being kind of told or directed to just go to church, but that was never enough for him. He wanted something so much more than just sit in church on Sunday, say a few prayers, go off and make money. So this was a struggle in him, and a big one, and it started to really take its toll on his mental health. But what's really interesting to me about Swami's life is how many of Master's teachings he came to just through thinking about it. He discovered affirmation. I'll give you 2 examples. He went on a trip to Mexico, and he became very, very ill, and the doctor said, "You have to go to the hospital. I think we're going to have you in here for a week." He didn't want to mention it to the doctor, but he had very little money. So he looked at how much the hospital charged per night, and he looked at how much money he had, and he figured he had to get out of there quick. So he told himself, with all his willpower, "I will be well tomorrow." And he woke up, and he was fine, and he left the hospital. Another time he was studying, he's brilliant, but he wasn't much of a student. Nothing actually really kind of caught his fancy in school. And one of the courses said he was just prepared to flunk, and the teacher would even mock him in class, James Donald Walters, "You never come to your Greek class, how do you ever hope to pass? A few of the students are going to be flunking this final coming up," and everyone would kind of turn and look at Swami. But he was studying, and it's almost on a parallel course to what Master did in Autobiography of a Yogi. He decided, he goes, "I am a Greek." He just affirmed with all his might that he was Greek, that he was born in Greece, that he loved Greek food, that everything about Greece was his. And then he studied for the test. And with a little bit of luck, he happened to choose just the right passage to study. He passed the test with flying colors. So he started to experiment just on his own with his own discovery of the teachings that Yogananda brought and articulated so well. He decided at that time, he says, I think modern science was saying that there's the Milky Way galaxy, and that there might be 7, maybe 8 other galaxies out there. They weren't sure, but there might be that many. Of course, now modern science, I believe, tells us there's 2.5 billion galaxies out there. I don't know how they could possibly know that, but Swami was saying at that time it was 7 or 8. But even with 7 or 8 galaxies, that's still a lot. Swami said, now how could God be this kind of white-haired man with a beard, sitting on a chair, ready to condemn of all of us for sinning? It just didn't make any sense to him. So he was, just through his own intellect, he was kind of figuring out what he thought God would be. And he thought, well, if God created this universe, these galaxies, he must be an infinite being. He must be infinitely conscious. And he can't be too worried about our little faults. But he wasn't finding anything in traditional churches or religion that was answering these questions. So he kept searching, and he kept searching. Well, this is a part of the story that he told a little bit on Saturday night. He finally found, his mother gave him a book, which was something, it had a lot of quotes in it from the different world religions. And the ones that came from the Hindu religion were the ones that spoke to him the most and the deepest. They were talking about some of the things that he had kind of come to on his own. This vast universe, this personal and impersonal God, a God that is infinitesimally large and infinitesimally small, caring, loving, for everybody. And so he took this, and then he decided he was going to go move to the country and live a simple life. Or maybe he would become a hermit. He had all these ideas and all these schemes that he was working on. But even with this understanding of the teachings, as much as he was able to, he had no happiness whatsoever. He had many gifts. People were telling him he could be a singer. He could be a playwright. He didn't feel like he wanted to write a play because he didn't know the truth. Well, he would just be adding more garbage to what's already out there. And the person said, you have such a great voice, maybe you could do commercial work. Again, he thought, I can't bring myself to do commercials for products I don't believe in. So he was rejecting a lot of different things, and he was filled with inner turmoil. So he goes to a bookstore in New York City. He used to go to New York City. He puts his mom on a ship to Cairo, and he walks to Dalton Books. And he walks in and he sees Autobiography of a Yogi. And the picture of Yogananda on the cover draws him. And he looks at that face and he thinks, this man has what I'm looking for. This could be my teacher. Let me find out more. So he opens it up and he finds out that Yogananda is alive and living in California. Swami had always had kind of this inkling that maybe someday he would go to California. It seemed like a far-off land at the time, but maybe there was something in California that would satisfy this inner turmoil. Then he opens up to the foreword, and it says, "Dedicated to Luther Burbank, an American saint." Swami closes the book. He says, "This is ridiculous. There's no such thing as saints in America. Americans are materialistic. All they want is money, greed, business. I don't want anything to do with this." So he closes the book. He buys Sir Edwin Arnold's translation of the Bhagavad Gita, takes it home, and again, he's inspired by it. He devours it, he says. Over 3 days, he reads it and rereads it. It's a very short book, but it has such potent, it's like the spiritual teachings of all religions distilled into one very short book. But then, little thing in the back of his mind reminds him of the book, Autobiography. And he thinks, well, there was that photo. And maybe, Swami had, by his own admission, a lot of pride in those days. And he was constantly trying to figure out a more humble approach. So maybe he missed something. Maybe there are American saints, he thought. Maybe this Luther Burbank is a saint. So he goes back to the bookstore, buys Autobiography, buys it, and reads it. And then he says, in his path, he says, it's the greatest book I've ever read. And Swami's very, very well read. He waits a day, he hops on a bus, takes him 4 days to go across country. He meets Yogananda through kind of a miracle. He gets to see Yogananda. At first they say, no, you can't see him. Yogananda's appointments are booked for 2.5 months. Again, he had to go back and say, well, maybe I'm not ready. At first he's like, look, I have to see him. I have to see this man right now. And he keeps getting this 4 times. They basically say, no, not quite. Well, maybe. Finally, Yogananda says, I'll see him. And the first thing Yogananda says to him is, it's not because you've come from New York that I'm willing to see you. Because there was a woman who came 2 weeks ago from Sweden, and Divine Mother told me not to see her. So there's something else. That's why I'm seeing you. And Swami says the words that he never thought he would say to anyone in his entire life. First words out of his mouth are, I want to be your disciple. Now, there's no way that Swami's life leading up to that can lead to that kind of sudden conversion. Not the way it happened. And it doesn't happen that way for most of us. I think it's mostly that we go about it slowly and we think and we analyze. But Swami is this man of tremendous power, and he was so desperate. So Yogananda asks him a few questions, basically tests his truthfulness, and he accepts him as a disciple right there on the spot, which was very unusual. That's in 1948. So Swami Kriyananda, for the next 60 years, he's celebrating his 60th anniversary coming up September 12th. For the next 60 years, what has Swami done? Well, he's done everything that his guru ever set in motion when he was in the body. He started communities. We have a community up at Ananda Village. Swami started it. We started city centers in San Francisco and Sacramento that grew into colonies, the Palo Alto colony, Sacramento. He started a colony in Portland, Seattle, Assisi, and now they're starting one in India. The other thing that Yogananda told him to do was to lecture and to write. Swami has written 91 books. I was trying to compute up how many lectures Swami has done. It's been many, many thousands of lectures. And to show you his humble service, he once let this slip in a talk. He said, I've never once looked forward to speaking in public. He said, well, maybe once. He said, but then once I'm up there and once I'm doing it, it's okay, and I don't mind it. So he's written and he's lectured. And the fourth thing he did is to start schools, because that was one of the first things Yogananda did. And now there's a school at the village and a high school. There's a school here in Palo Alto. There's a school in Portland. They're starting one. They have one in Seattle. Sacramento, I'm sure, will be starting one. Assisi has one, and India is talking about it. So it's that humble service to the Guru. So that leads us to last Saturday night, and I'm on the stage crew. And I'm backstage. And setup was very, very easy. And it took about 20 minutes. We rolled out a carpet, we put a nice chair, we set up some risers. That was at 9 in the morning, and then we wait. Swami comes at about 7 o'clock. And the thing that I think is hard for me in preparing for this talk is how do you put it into words? You know, you can talk about his accomplishments, but it's the way he holds himself. It's the way he speaks with calmness, with clarity, with compassion, and he's so deep in the spine. It's so tempting when you kind of have a certain amount of popularity to kind of play a game and to kind of relish in it. He has none of that. He was so completely centered as he walked out on that stage, so humble. As he came off stage, he was making jokes. We were all saying, "Oh, that was a wonderful talk, sir. That was just great." And he sat down in this chair and he just said, "What'd I say? I don't even remember." And David said, "Well, you seem so relaxed." And he said, "Well," and he said it with a real straight face. He said, "Well, that's because I took a sleeping pill before I went out there tonight." He doesn't put on any sort of pretense. He doesn't try to show up, you know, that, "Oh, I'm this, I'm that." He was just so perfectly in the spine. Now, I had an interesting experience Saturday as part of the setup because I didn't even know what was going on. But we get there at 9, we set up. It's 9:30, we're all ready to go. There's nothing to do. It's a 2,700-seat theater, and all the lights are out. So they say, "Well, we need someone to sit in for Swami." They just go sit in Swami's chair. So I think, well, I can do that. So I go and I sit in Swami's chair, and I don't even realize it, but they're trying to get the projection screen that he was projected up on to be clear. So I just sat there for an hour and a half in the chair. But I started to just daydream. And I daydreamed about Swami walking out on stage that night. I started daydreaming, what if I was to give the talk that night? What if I walked out and there was 2,700 people? What would I say? What would you guys say? What would any one of us say about the spiritual path if you were out there up on stage? And the funny thing is, it's not like here where I can see you. When you're up on that stage and they turn on those stage lights, you can't see anything. You can see to the edge of the stage. You don't know if there's 4 people in the audience or 2,700. I thought about Yogananda in the 1930s streaming out on stage in orange robes and long hair and getting Carnegie Hall to chant "Oh God Beautiful" for 90 minutes. The guru's consciousness and the way the guru works is always in kind of this, I don't know how to put it. It's not the Western kind of A plus B equals C approach. The guru can change the molecules in your consciousness. He can lift your awareness without you even being aware of it. The Bhagavad Gita gives us 4 things to do when we find our spiritual teacher. Let me see if I can remember them. One of them is to have a little bit of faith, because you can't have all your questions answered before you start on the spiritual path. At some point, Swami had questions about Yogananda. That's fine. You have to have faith. You have to be open to learning. You know, as a teacher, when you're working with students, you can have the brightest student in the class. If they're closed down, if they don't feel they're good in math or art or whatever it is, good luck. Good luck trying to get that student to do anything. You've got to be open to some sort of like, maybe I can do this, maybe I can learn something from this person, maybe there's something in this that I can learn. The third thing is you can ask questions. In fact, the Gita says we should ask questions. They should be sincere questions. We're not there to impress the guru with how much we know. We're there to learn from the guru. And the fourth thing is to serve humbly. So these 4 things were in evidence over the weekend. Before I move on, I know John might like this story. Part of what they were working on with the projection screen was to try to get it clear. They felt like it was distorting the image. And so they felt like it was making my face kind of egg-shaped as opposed to round. So they said, well, hold up something really round, and then we'll see. If it doesn't look round on the screen, then we know that the projection is distorting it. So we started with this little roll of tape. So I sat there for about 20 minutes, you know, in my daydream of giving speeches to 2,700 people. I'm then holding up this roll of tape, but that wasn't big enough, so they got me a 5-gallon plastic bucket. And for about 20 minutes, I held this plastic bucket up in front of my face, you know, in case, you know, my pride started getting into it or I started to think that I was really something. I just held this plastic bucket, and they said, okay, we got it now. And so I hope the image was clear for Swamiji. So that leaves all of us last weekend. And the amount of service and the amount of joyful participation that we were all doing. I don't want to embarrass anyone, but John and Paulette, I saw them pop in. Are they still here? They did this flower arrangement that was unbelievable. And Saturday night, it was late. Thursday night went late. Friday, the takedown went late. Saturday, it was a long weekend, and people were getting tired. They had these gorgeous flower arrangements. And I just thought, great, we'll pick them up, we'll put them in the van, we'll bring them here, we'll put them on the altar, Sunday's flowers are handled. But this was a kind of energy that was throughout the whole weekend. They individually dismantled the entire arrangement, put all the flowers back into buckets, brought them all over here late Saturday night, and rearranged the flower arrangements. It's that kind of really, I wish it were more complicated and glitzy, but Swami says in his writings that look around on the spiritual path and see who it is who's growing spiritually. It's people who humbly learn from the guru or their teacher and who give a little bit back, who don't try to, show off how great they are, but just try to channel the divine through their own lives. And I know that the topic Saturday night was pretty serious. It was Swami talking about peace in unsettled times. But the thing to remember is that when we do our best, God comes and he helps us. So I'm going to end with a story from our school garden. We did a little vegetable garden over here. And my lesson plan was that wouldn't it be great if a child could plant a seed and experience just the miracle of a plant growing? That was enough for me. Just you plant a seed, you water it, and 2 weeks later you see a little plant, let alone, we've gotten a lot of vegetables out of the garden. So Doug, our science teacher, decides to do it with the real little ones, the pre-K and the kindergarten children, the real small ones. And it's just a classic thing that teachers create these lesson plans, and we think they're going to work beautifully, and the kids will love it and say, thank you, Doug, for showing us about the plants and the seeds. And none of it works at all according to plan. So Doug has them out there, and he's asking them to plant the seeds 1/4 of an inch deep. He went to Long's, he bought squash and a few different vegetables. And the kids are digging these holes and planting them 4 inches deep and 6, and no one's listening. He said it was just a complete and total disaster. It was just nothing worked at all. But the funny thing is that of all the crops we've grown this year, it's the squash that has done the best. There's a little basket out in front. You can have some today if you'd like. That squash has just kept coming. It's huge. I don't know what the kids did. I think it might just be their sweetness. When our hearts are in the right place, things tend to work out just fine. So try to remember that. And I think during these hard times that are coming up, it'll be especially critical for all of us to just keep our hearts open, keep in tune with the Guru, keep in tune with one another, and serve like we all did last weekend. Thank you.